The present conditions of civilization, which tend more and more to differentiate men of the same race, are confronted by the powerful laws of heredity, which tend to bring about the disappearance of the individuals who surpass the average in too marked a manner, or at least to bring them down to this average. Observations already old, recorded by the authors of investigations into heredity, have proved that the descendants of families distinguished by their intelligence are subject sooner or later, and most usually at an early date, to a process of degeneration which tends to extinguish them entirely. Great intellectual superiority seems, then, to carry with it the penalty that those who possess it leave behind them degenerate offspring. In reality, the point of the social pyramid of which I spoke above can only subsist on the condition that it assimilates elements from below. If all the individuals composing this elite were to be relegated to an isolated island, their intermarriages would result in the formation of a race displaying a variety of degenerate symptoms and destined in consequence to disappear speedily. Great intellectual superiorities may be compared to the botanical monstrosities created by the artifice of a gardener. Left to themselves, they die off or return to the average type of the species, for the species is all-powerful since it represents the long series of ancestors. Attentive study of the different peoples shows that while the individuals of a given race may be immensely differentiated as regards the intelligence, they are but slightly differentiated as regards the character, that unalterable rock of which I have already shown the permanence throughout the ages. In studying a race, it should be considered in consequence from two very different points of view. From the intellectual point of view, its value depends on a small elite, to which is due the scientific, literary, and industrial progress of a civilization. From the point of view of character, acquaintance with the average is alone important. The strength of peoples is always dependent on the level of this average. Peoples may do at a pinch without an intellectual elite, but not without a certain level of character. We shall shortly prove this statement. It is thus seen that while the individuals of a race become more and more differentiated intellectually, as time goes on, they always tend, as far as character is concerned, to oscillate round the average type of the race. It is to this average type, which progresses very slowly, that the great majority of the members of a nation belong. Around this fundamental kernel is found, in the case at least of the superior peoples, a thin layer of eminent minds, whose action is of capital importance as regards civilization, but is without importance as regards the race. Incessantly being destroyed, it is incessantly being renewed at the expense of the average grades, which for their part vary but very slowly, since the slightest variations, in order to become durable, must be accumulated in the same direction by heredity during several centuries. It was several years ago that I arrived, basing my conclusions on researches of a purely anatomical order, at the idea just enunciated touching the differentiation of individuals and races, and to justify which I have now invoked none but psychological reasons. As the two kinds of observation lead to the same results, I may be allowed to recall some of the conclusions of my earlier investigations. They are based on measurements executed on several thousands of skulls, ancient and modern, belonging to different races. I proceed to give the more essential passages. The volume of the skull bears a close relation to the intelligence. When leaving individual cases out of consideration, series are dealt with. It is then found that what distinguishes inferior from superior races is not the slight variations in the average capacity of their skulls, but this essential fact that the superior race contains a certain number of individuals whose brain is highly developed, whereas the inferior race contains no such individuals. Races differ in consequence not in respect to the masses that constitute them, but in respect to the small number of individuals who stand out from the crowd. The average difference between the skull in the case of two peoples, except when quite inferior races are under consideration, is never very considerable. When the skulls are compared of the various human races belonging to the past and present, it is found that the races in which the volume of the skull presents the greatest individual variations are the most highly civilized races. That in proportion as a race grows civilized, the skulls of the individuals composing it become more and more differentiated, a fact which leads to the result that civilization conduces not to intellectual equality, but to an inequality that is always growing more pronounced. anatomical and physiological equality only exist in the case of individuals of quite inferior races. The differences between the members of a tribe of savages, all of whom follow the same occupation, are perforce of the slightest. Between the peasant whose vocabulary consists of some 300 words and the man of learning who is familiar with 100,000 words and with the ideas that correspond to them, the difference is, on the contrary, enormous. I should add to what precedes that the differentiation of individuals brought about by the development of civilization is also apparent in the case of the sexes. Among inferior peoples or the inferior classes of superior peoples, the man and the woman are intellectually on much the same level. On the other hand, in proportion as peoples grow civilized, the difference between the sexes is accentuated. The volume of the male and female skull, even when the subjects compared, as in my investigations, are strictly of the same age, height, and weight, presents differences that increase rapidly with the degree of civilization. Very slight in the case of the inferior races, these differences become immense in the case of the superior races. In these superior races, the feminine skulls are often scarcely more developed than those of the women of very inferior races. Whereas the average volume of the skulls of male Parisians is such as to range them among the largest known skulls, the average of the skulls of female Parisians classes them among the smallest skulls with which we are acquainted, almost on a level with the skulls of Chinese women, and scarcely above the feminine skulls of New Caledonia. Footnote: Dr. Gustave Le Bon, Recherches anatomiques et mathématiques sur les variations des volumes du cerveau et sur leurs relations avec l'intelligence. 8, volume 1879, memoir crowned by the Academy of Sciences and by the Society of Anthropology. End of footnote.